The Awakening, Seeing the Prison of the Mind. Picture this: early morning light spilling through the blinds, that faint hum of the world starting again. Yet inside, a quiet heaviness lingers. We've all felt it, the sense that something inside our own heads keeps pulling us back into the same loops. We wake, we hope, we plan, and still our thoughts drag us toward yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's worries. Our minds, which should be our greatest allies, begin to feel like narrow cells. We pace the same few square feet of mental space, rehearsing what-ifs and should-haves, convinced that freedom lies somewhere outside us. But what if the cell door has always been unlocked? What if the key was never missing, just unused? We live in an age of endless advice. Think positive, manifest, grind harder. Yet the louder the noise grows, the further we drift from silence. And silence is where clarity hides. We repeat affirmations while a small voice inside whispers its dissent. We try to overwrite every fear with optimism. But the mind is stubborn. It fights the editing. We become soldiers at war with ourselves, both attacker and defender, burning energy on internal battles no one else can see. Every victory feels temporary because each attempt to crush a thought only feeds it. The Stoics warned of this trap centuries ago. What we resist, we reinforce. The more we wrestle our thoughts, the stronger they return. Real strength begins not in conquest, but in release. The truth is uncomfortable yet liberating. We cannot win a war against our own mind. The act of constant resistance is the problem itself. Trying to think our way out of thinking is like trying to smooth water by pressing on it. The ripples multiply. Freedom begins when we stop fighting and start observing, when we realize that thoughts are weather patterns, not prison bars. The forgotten key lies in a different direction, not forcing the mind into silence, but guiding it through deliberate action. This is the beginning of the rebuild. And that brings us to the first principle of transformation, the rule that flips everything we were taught about belief and action. The forgotten rule: action shapes belief. For generations, we were told that belief precedes action, that we must first feel confident, inspired, or ready before we act. But life doesn't wait for readiness. The forgotten rule reminds us, our actions shape our beliefs. William James, the father of modern psychology, wrote that acting as if something were true often makes it true. Confidence is not a precondition, it is a consequence. Every deliberate act becomes a proof point that teaches the mind what to believe about itself. We are not thinkers trying to act, we are actors learning what to think through evidence. Marcus Aurelius echoed the same truth from another century. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. We misread this line when we imagine power as control over emotion. The Stoics meant something subtler. Power resides in choice, in voluntary action. Feelings arrive uninvited. Actions are elected. When we choose an action aligned with virtue, even while afraid or uncertain, we begin to retrain the internal narrative. Discipline plants confidence. Motion cultivates meaning. Belief follows the footsteps we take. Think of the mind as an untended garden overrun by weeds of doubt. For years, we've stood at the edge demanding the weeds become roses through willpower alone. The forgotten rule invites us to stop arguing and start gardening. Pick up the tool, pull one weed, plant one seed. Each motion is evidence that we are no longer prisoners of hesitation. The soil responds not to intention, but to effort. In time, we look around and realize the landscape has changed, and so have we. If this message is connecting with you, subscribe. We're rebuilding discipline together, one deliberate action at a time. Awareness of this rule is powerful, but living it requires structure. Next, we'll explore the framework that turns insight into practice, the 3 pillars of mental reconstruction. The rewiring process, 3 pillars of reconstruction. Understanding the forgotten rule is the spark, living it is the rebuild. Reconstructing the mind is not an abstract miracle, but a daily craft. The Stoics described the disciplined soul as a sculptor, each chisel strike a choice, each choice a refinement. Modern neuroscience now echoes that idea through a different language, neuroplasticity. Every deliberate act reshapes the brain's architecture. The more we choose awareness over reaction, purpose over impulse, the more the brain begins to favor those pathways. So we rebuild the mind through repetition, not revelation. The process rests on 3 pillars: awareness, interruption, and deliberate action. The first pillar is the observer's standpoint. This is the discipline of awareness. Most of us drown in the stream of consciousness, identifying with every thought that floats by. But awareness is the act of stepping onto the riverbank. We notice the current without being swept away. Modern psychology calls it cognitive distancing. Ancient philosophy called it mindfulness. The method is simple, but profound. When a negative thought appears, we label it. There is the thought that I am failing. There is the feeling of anxiety. Labeling breaks fusion. It transforms emotion into observation. In that small space between stimulus and response lives freedom. For the next 24 hours, our mission is not to fix our thoughts, but to notice them. Each observation is a small victory over autopilot. The second pillar is the pattern interrupt. Awareness reveals the loop. Interruption breaks it. Imagine a record skipping, playing the same anxious chorus. A pattern interrupt is the hand that lifts the needle. When we catch ourselves spiraling, we move, stand, breathe, change rooms, say "stop" out loud. These physical and verbal cues jolt the nervous system out of inertia. We can also ground ourselves using sensory anchors, naming 5 things we can see, 4 we can feel, 3 we can hear, 2 we can smell, 1 we can taste. The act sounds small, but it reclaims sovereignty from the swirl of thought. Choose your interrupt now, before you need it. When the storm arrives, there will be no time to improvise. The prepared mind remains steady. The third pillar is deliberate action, the proof of a new reality. This is where the rule comes alive. Thoughts convince no one. Evidence convinces everyone, especially the mind. Each small act is a receipt, proof that the old narrative no longer governs us. If the belief is, "I can't stay focused," our deliberate act is to work for 5 minutes, nothing more. When we do, we create neural evidence that contradicts the old story. That single choice begins rewiring circuits, reinforcing agency instead of avoidance. Confidence, it turns out, is cumulative. Every act deposits a coin in the account of self-trust. This process is deceptively simple. Observe, interrupt, act. But simplicity is not weakness, it is focus. Every time we complete the cycle, we weaken the brain's old pathways of helplessness and strengthen the new pathways of action. In neuroscience terms, neurons that fire together wire together. When awareness, interruption, and action are practiced repeatedly, the brain begins to favor them automatically. We become the architects of our own default settings. Soon, awareness becomes effortless, interruption natural, and action instinctive. The rebuild becomes a rhythm rather than a routine. Let's make it real. The belief, I'm not consistent. Step 1. We notice the thought without judgment. Step 2. We interrupt it. Stand, stretch, breathe. Step 3. We take the smallest possible action that disproves it. Write for 5 minutes, go for a short walk, tidy one corner of the desk. That small act is a seed. And like any seed, it doesn't argue its way into growth. It simply acts. Over time, consistency stops being an aspiration and becomes identity. That's how the forgotten rule quietly rebuilds the foundation of belief from the ground up. As these new pathways form, something subtle but extraordinary happens. We begin to experience calm not as absence of struggle, but as mastery within it. That leads us to the next lesson: what life feels like once the mind begins to rebuild itself. Living the rebuilt mind. When the pillars become habits, the inner landscape begins to shift. At first, the changes are almost imperceptible, soft moments of clarity that pass like sunlight through clouds. We notice ourselves catching an old negative thought and smiling at it, recognizing it as familiar but no longer powerful. This is the moment the old system starts to lose control. The critic still speaks, but we no longer obey. It's like hearing a radio in another room. You can register the sound, but it doesn't dictate your movement. Awareness replaces reaction. The garden of the mind begins to show its first signs of bloom. As this calm awareness strengthens, resilience becomes second nature. A difficult email, an unexpected delay, a small failure, once enough to derail the entire day, now feels manageable. The Stoics spoke of this as apatheia, not numbness, but serenity born from self-command. We learn to respond rather than react. This is where emotional intelligence meets Stoic discipline. We no longer measure success by the absence of problems, but by the grace with which we handle them. Life's storms do not cease. We simply learn to sail. The noise inside begins to quiet, not through suppression, but starvation. We stop feeding our fears with attention. The pathways of worry grow weak through disuse, while new highways of calm, deliberate action become the preferred routes. In time, peace becomes not a state to chase, but a baseline to protect. We see setbacks as feedback, not failure. The internal war that once consumed us transforms into a conversation, a dialogue where we listen, observe, and guide. Our emotions remain, but now they move within structure, not chaos. And from that stillness grows something profound: agency. The realization that freedom was never external, but always rooted in choice. Let's explore that deeper sense of ownership in the next lesson. Freedom is not the absence of limits, it is mastery within them. The Stoics and modern psychologists alike understood that true agency emerges when we act according to values, not emotions. Feelings fluctuate, values endure. The rebuilt mind learns to consult its principles before its impulses. We begin to ask a new kind of question, not "how do I feel?" but "what does this moment ask of me?" That shift is power. When we focus on the controllable, our effort, our response, our integrity, life becomes simpler, cleaner. We no longer chase every fleeting emotional weather front, we build shelter through purpose. Viktor Frankl, who endured the worst conditions imaginable, wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose. That space is the heart of freedom. Every time we observe instead of react, every time we interrupt a destructive loop and take one small action aligned with purpose, we expand that space. Our capacity grows. The outside world doesn't get easier. Our inner framework becomes stronger. This is mental strength, Not bravado, but quiet endurance built through countless small victories. We can think of the rebuilt mind as an internal fortress, but not a cold one. It's a fortress of clarity, compassion, and grounded purpose. From within it, we no longer view life as something happening to us, but something unfolding with us. Confidence becomes a byproduct of alignment. When our actions match our values, we trust ourselves again. The forgotten rule has done its work. Deliberate action has reshaped belief, and belief now fuels even greater action. If this message helped reshape your mindset, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more. Each video in this series is another brick in your foundation of discipline, clarity, and inner peace. The final phase of our journey is not about knowledge, it's about continuation, how we live this rule daily, and how to begin right now. Continuation and daily application. We've traveled from awareness to action, from inner conflict to calm strength. Now comes the simplest and hardest part: continuation. Knowledge without practice fades like ink in the rain. The forgotten rule only transforms us when we live it. So our mission isn't to master every pillar at once. It's to repeat them until they become instinct. For the next 24 hours, focus only on the first pillar: awareness. Observe your thoughts without judgment. Label them gently. There is the thought that I am not enough. There is the feeling of worry. Each acknowledgement builds distance, and in that distance, freedom begins. This act alone signals to your brain that you're serious about change. It's the smallest possible step, and the most important. Tomorrow, you'll add the second pillar, interruption. Then the third, deliberate action. These steps form a rhythm: observe, interrupt, act, that becomes the heartbeat of a disciplined mind. Write down one recurring thought you've noticed and share it with someone who's also on this path. By externalizing it, you remove its power. You'll also see that you're not alone in this rebuild. Remember, we're not trying to win a war against the mind. We're laying down our weapons and picking up tools. Each action, no matter how small, is a vote for the person we are becoming. Rebuilding the mind is not a one-time reset. It's an ongoing relationship with awareness, courage, and choice. Thanks for watching. Join the Limitless Mindset community and keep growing with us. Each episode is a new reminder that the power lies not in what we think, but in what we do. So take the next small, deliberate step today and rebuild your mind one action at a time.